The metallic scent of ozone clung to the air that night, thick and unnatural. A sticky, cold dampness seeped through his jacket, as if the very atmosphere was weeping. Then, a sound, not a roar, not a hum, but a deep, subsonic vibration that felt more like a pressure in the bones than a noise in the ears. His breath hitched, trapped in his throat. Every primal instinct screamed to run, but his limbs were leaden. Above him, the sky didn't just darken, it was replaced. A perfect, silent void of blacker than black, punctuated by 3 points of searing, actinic white light. This was no distant spectacle. It was a presence, an intelligence that didn't observe, but consumed the very reality around it. And in that moment of absolute dread, he understood the terrifying truth the grainy videos would never show. The Phoenix Lights weren't something you saw. They were something that saw you. March 13th, 1997 began like any other spring evening in Phoenix, with families settling in after dinner and the desert air cooling as twilight descended. The first reports came in just after 7:30 p.m. calls flooding 911 dispatchers about strange, silent lights moving in perfect formation across the northern sky. Witnesses described a craft so massive it blotted out the stars, moving with impossible slowness and utter silence, casting an eerie, shifting shadow over entire neighborhoods. The air grew heavy with the faint, metallic scent of ozone, as if the atmosphere itself had been charged by the object's passage. For those standing directly beneath it, a strange, prickling sensation crawled across their skin. Not cold, but a static, electric feeling that made hairs stand on end. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the formation vanished. Not speeding away, but simply fading from existence, leaving behind only a profound, unsettling quiet. The night air in Phoenix carried the dry, earthy scent of creosote bush and warm asphalt, still radiating the day's heat. In a quiet backyard, citronella candles cast long, dancing shadows across manicured Bermuda grass, their sharp citrus aroma cutting through the humidity. The faint, rhythmic chirping of crickets formed a constant backdrop, punctuated by the distant hum of a pool filter from a neighboring yard. A sudden, cool pocket of air drifted through, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of ozone, out of place on this dry desert night. The candle flames didn't just flicker. They dipped and swayed, as if pressed by an invisible hand, their light glistening off a sudden, unexpected dampness on the glass tabletops. From the deep shadows beyond the candlelight, a new sound emerged. Not the crickets, but a soft, wet scratching, like something dragging slowly across the patio stones. The chorus of cicadas swelled in the humid evening air, a relentless, buzzing blanket that seemed to press down on the quiet suburban backyard. John Miller took a slow, weary sip from his bottle, the glass cool and slick against his palm, the taste a temporary bitterness that did nothing to wash away the day's worries. His wife, Sarah, tilted her head back, her gaze lost in the vast, star-dusted velvet of the night sky, a silent communion with the infinite. "You could see everything out here," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper above the insect hum. "Makes your problems feel small, doesn't it?" John didn't look up, his focus anchored to the worn wood of the table. "Tell that to the bank," he replied, the words flat and heavy, carrying the metallic scent of overdue notices and cold dread. And in that quiet moment, under the watchful stars, John and Sarah Miller were drowning. Not in water, but in a silent, deepening quicksand of debt and despair. The peaceful night, a cruel contrast to the turmoil within. Not in water, but in debt. The medical bills from Sarah's mother's illness had piled up, a silent, suffocating weight in their neat little home. The paper stack on the table seemed to absorb the room's warmth, leaving behind only the dry, dusty scent of hopelessness and the faint chemical smell of printer ink. That night, the vast, star-dusted sky felt like the only escape. The cold glass of the window pane pressed against her forehead as she stared upward, the infinite blackness offering a hollow, airless kind of peace that made her chest feel tight. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard groaned under its own weight, the sound a lonely echo in the stillness. The air inside was thick, with the greasy smell of old fryer oil and stale coffee, a familiar, almost sticky atmosphere that clung to the vinyl booths and chrome fixtures. The silence in the Superstition Mountains was a living entity, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't the absence of sound, but a presence that filled every space between the rocks and scrub oak. The air carried the scent of sun-baked earth and something else underneath, something metallic and ancient, like old coins buried too long. When the wind did stir, it didn't whisper through the canyons. It rasped, like dry bones scraping against stone. Mike felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, a tangible pressure that made each breath feel shallow and insufficient. This was the silence that comes before revelation or ruin. A quiet so complete it felt like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. And in that heavy stillness, the most rational explanation began to feel like the thinnest of veils over something much older and far less forgiving. Tom's dog, a normally placid golden retriever, froze mid-step, its hackles rising like bristles on a brush. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, a sound Tom had never heard in their 10 years together. He followed the dog's intense gaze down the empty, tree-lined street, seeing only manicured lawns and porch lights flickering on. Yet the air itself seemed to thicken, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ozone, like the moment before a lightning strike. A profound stillness descended, broken only by the frantic scratching of the dog's claws against the pavement as it tried to back away. In that instant, a primal understanding gripped Tom. This was no squirrel or passing car. Something was profoundly, terribly wrong with the empty space before them. It began just after 8 p.m., when calls started flooding into the Henderson Police Department from every corner of the city. The witnesses described the same impossible sight, a massive, silent formation of lights, gliding across the sky in a perfect V-shape. The air grew thick with the sharp, metallic scent of ozone, as if the sky itself was being torn open. Then, the police scanner chatter began, a frantic, overlapping chorus of disbelief and rising panic that filled the dispatch center. Each new report intensified the static-laden cacophony, a sound wave of collective dread that seemed to press down on the city. A primal, gut-deep fear took hold of the operators as they realized this was no isolated event, but something vast and deliberate moving among them. By 8:30, it was over Phoenix, a silent leviathan blotting out the stars with its impossible scale. In the backyard, the sudden, complete absence of the cicadas. Drone felt like a physical void, a blanket of unnatural quiet smothering the night. The air itself seemed to thicken, growing dense and cold, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ozone that pricked at the back of the throat. John's hand found Sarah's, their fingers interlocking in a grip made tight not by affection, but by a shared, instinctive need for anchor in the stillness. Her whisper, "John," was less a question and more a fragile sound breaking the surface of that profound silence, a plea for confirmation that he felt it too. And together, they looked up, their gazes drawn inexorably upward, not by curiosity, but by a deep-seated dread of what now filled the space where sound used to live. The V-shaped craft hung in the night sky, a solid, dark mass that blotted out the constellations with its sheer, silent presence. It made no engine hum, no atmospheric disturbance, only an immense, oppressive quiet that seemed to absorb all sound from the world below. The air grew heavy and thick, carrying a faint, metallic scent like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something older and colder. John's breath hitched in his chest, his lungs struggling against the sudden pressure, a primal dread taking hold as he comprehended the scale of the thing above him. This was no collection of distant lights. It was a structured entity, a monolithic visitor from a place where the rules of physics seemed merely optional. For most who witnessed it, this moment transcended fear, becoming a raw, overwhelming awe that paralyzed the mind and rooted the body to the earth. The crowd's cheers and whoops transformed into a chaotic roar as Mike and Lisa pushed through the throng, the scent of ozone and hot asphalt hanging thick in the night air. Lisa's voice cut through the din, sharp and certain, her finger pointing skyward where the unmistakable, heavy thrum of rotor blades began to dominate the soundscape. The air grew heavy, charged with a sudden, oppressive weight that seemed to press down on their shoulders, silencing the disbelief that had filled the diner moments before. A primal dread took hold, cold and sticky like the sweat now beading on their skin, as the mechanical whine of the aircraft descended, drowning out all other sound. This was no local curiosity or misidentified plane. The sheer scale and authoritative presence of the craft spoke of an official, imposing response to something they had just witnessed. In that moment, the laughter was gone, replaced by the visceral understanding that their world had just shifted, and the rules of a normal night were irrevocably broken. Mike's confident grin vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare that wasn't focused on the strange lights themselves. His gaze drilled into the absolute void at the heart of that luminous formation, a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light around it. Then, a sudden, sharp sensation, like the touch of a frozen needle, prickled at the nape of his neck. It wasn't just a chill. It was a specific, localized warning, a biological alarm firing directly into his brainstem. The air around him grew thick and stagnant, carrying a faint metallic tang like old pennies and the distant, damp smell of cold soil. Every instinct he possessed, every ancient, hardwired circuit for survival, screamed a single, silent command: do not look, but do not look away. But the witness insisted what he saw was no flare. It was a pale, cold light, hovering just above the treetops, completely silent. He described the air growing thick and electric, smelling faintly of ozone, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, a sound, not from the light, but from the woods around it, a wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through damp leaves. A sticky, cloying scent of decay drifted on the wind, overwhelming the clean smell of pine. It was the smell of something long dead and left to rot in the damp earth. His muscles locked. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but a primal terror held him rooted to the spot, a spectator to the impossible. The official report offers a tidy conclusion: military flares, a simple mistake. But it never explains the feeling of being watched from that silent light, or the visceral wrongness that clung to the air that night. In the Miller bedroom, Sarah jolted awake, as if shocked from a dreamless sleep, her eyes snapping open to the oppressive darkness. Her husband John stirred beside her, his voice thick with sleep as he mumbled a groggy response, barely registering her sudden tension. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she strained to listen, her ears picking up a faint metallic chime that seemed to drift from the walls themselves. The sound wasn't the familiar rhythm of their bedside clock, but something discordant and unnatural, like gears grinding against time itself. A damp, earthy scent seeped into the room, carrying the faint iron tang of old pipes and something else, something organic and forgotten. Sarah's fingers tightened on the blanket, the fabric feeling suddenly coarse and cold against her skin as the wrongness of the chime settled in her bones. Across town, in Mike's dim apartment, a similar unease was taking root, though he wouldn't realize its source until much later. John's hands trembled as the photograph developed in the chemical bath, the acrid scent of fixer stinging his nostrils. The image resolved into a stark, black void between the streetlights. But something felt wrong. The darkness wasn't empty. He lifted the dripping print with cold, clammy fingers, the paper sticking slightly as he brought it under the safe light. Through his magnifying glass, faint indentations materialized, geometric lines intersecting at impossible angles, like some alien circuitry etched into reality itself. The air in the darkroom grew thick with ozone and dread, his breath catching as he realized what he was seeing. That's when the narrator revealed the chilling truth. John had started sleepwalking, his unconscious mind perhaps drawn to this hidden pattern in the night. He'd wake up in the backyard, staring at the exact spot where the craft had been, his skin icy cold. The damp morning air carried a faint, metallic scent that clung to the back of his throat, a ghost of what had been there. His bare feet felt numb against the wet, cold soil, a tactile memory of that unnatural chill that had seeped into him. Sarah began to dream in fragments, not of ships, but of vast, dark rooms, and a feeling of being meticulously studied. In these dreams, the air was thick and stale, smelling of dust and something faintly antiseptic, like an abandoned laboratory. She felt a constant, gentle pressure on her skin, not painful, but pervasive and clinical, as if invisible hands were taking measurements. The dog's whine was a high, anxious thread in the quiet evening, its nose twitching at a scent Tom couldn't perceive, something sharp and oily. Tom's eyes fixed on the figure under the street lamp, its posture unnaturally rigid, as if carved from stone. The only movement came from moths dancing in the yellow light, their frantic wings brushing against the glass with a papery rustle. A faint, metallic scent hung in the damp air, like old pennies left in the rain, making Tom's throat tighten. He felt the cold pavement seep through the soles of his shoes, a creeping numbness that matched the stillness before him. His voice, when it finally came, was a dry croak that seemed to vanish into the thick, heavy atmosphere. From the house's dark windows, a low, rhythmic scratching sound began, like claws slowly dragging down old wood. Mike, the skeptic, refused to let the case go. Late into the night, he scoured obscure forums and declassified databases, his fingers tapping a frantic rhythm against the keyboard. His search revealed others who had witnessed the impossible, like a retired air traffic controller from Phoenix. This controller swore his equipment didn't track the object flying away into the night sky. Instead, his radar showed it descending, plummeting straight down into the jagged peaks of the Estrella Mountains. Not a flight path, but a burial. A cold, metallic scent seemed to cling to the data, a ghost of ozone and fear. The nurse's station reeked of antiseptic and the sharp electric tang of ozone. A smell that shouldn't be there. Her fingers, sticky with cold sweat, traced the identical burn patterns on 5 separate patient files, each retina scorched by something unseen. Every patient whispered the same terrified refrain, their voices thin and frayed. They hadn't stared at any light, but felt a palpable, watching pressure from the absolute dark. Then, Mike's voice crackled through the phone static, each word labored as if pushed through thick mud. It wasn't a craft, Lisa. A long, shaky pause filled the line, heavy with a dread that thickened the air in the listener's own room. I think it was a door. The line hissed with emptiness. Then his final, gut-churning whisper, quote, and something opened it from the other side. John's tires crunched over parched earth as he parked at the desert's edge, the city's distant glow of false comfort behind him. Above him, the silent craft had traced a path like a ghostly scar across the sky, visible only in the memories of those beneath it. Every person living directly under that eerie transit reported the same secondary symptom. Not a sight, but a sound. The dissonant, metallic clatter of a broken chime. The air here carried the dry, mineral scent of ancient dust, mixed with a faint, acrid tang like ozone after a storm. John's skin prickled, not from cold, but from a creeping, static charge that seemed to cling to the very atmosphere. In the stillness, his mind replayed the victims. Accounts that fractured chiming, a sound that promised nothing good, echoing in their ears long after the craft had passed. He stood alone, the vast Estrella foothills rising like silent sentinels, holding secrets in their shadowed folds. This was the ground zero of the pattern, a place where the sky had touched the earth and left a mark not on the land, but on the people. He parks his car in the gravel lot, the engine's final cough swallowed by the unnatural stillness. Getting out, the night air feels thick and cold, clinging to his skin like a damp shroud. The world is wrapped in a profound hush, broken only by the crunch of his own footsteps on the gravel. His eyes lock onto Mike's truck, a familiar silhouette in the gloom, its presence both a relief and a confirmation of shared dread. They find each other, two strangers drawn together not by chance, but by a secret that hums in the air between them. Mike's voice cuts the quiet, low, and strained. "You hear it too, don't you?" The metallic chime seemed to resonate from within the very bedrock, a sound that wasn't just heard but physically felt. John's teeth ached with a deep, sympathetic vibration, a sensation of pressure that had nothing to do with the cold, thin air of the canyon. The shallow canyon they entered felt like a natural amphitheater, amplifying the sound and the palpable, electric charge that made the fine hairs on their arms stand on end. The air itself tasted of ozone and dry dust, crackling with a low-frequency hum that bypassed the ears and settled directly into the bone. And there, carved into the ancient sandstone wall, was the source, a pattern not of natural erosion, but of deliberate, impossible geometry. The lines and curves of the design seemed to drink the fading light, creating pockets of shadow so deep they felt solid, and from their center, the faint chime issued its silent, resonant command. The pattern wasn't carved or etched, but stained into the rock itself, as if the very stone had been imprinted by a massive, energized field. The air around the rock face grew thick and heavy, charged with a faint, metallic tang that coated the back of Mike's throat like static. His breath hitched, the only sound in the oppressive quiet, as he traced the impossible lines with his eyes. Lines that seemed to drink the faint light rather than reflect it. A deep, resonant hum, felt more than heard, began to vibrate up through the soles of his boots, a frequency that made his teeth ache. The stone felt unnaturally cold to the touch, a deep, penetrating chill that seeped into his fingertips even from inches away, smelling faintly of ozone and wet earth. In that moment, staring at the impossible stain, a primal understanding took hold. This was a scar, a permanent record of something immense passing through a world not meant to bear its weight. John's voice dropped to a tense whisper, each word measured and deliberate as he stared at the patch of earth before him. The soil wasn't just compressed. It bore a perfect circular depression, as if something of immense weight had settled there with impossible precision. Then, without warning, the chime returned, not as a distant echo, but sharp and crystalline, slicing through the evening air with unnatural clarity. A low vibration began beneath their feet, a deep hum that traveled up through the soles of their boots and settled in their bones. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone, that sharp, electric smell that lingers after lightning strikes. mixed with something older, like damp earth that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. John's hands trembled as he reached out, not to touch the ground, but to steady himself against the sudden, overwhelming pressure building in the clearing. From the shadows of the canyon, figures emerged, moving with a synchronized, jerky grace that defied natural movement. These were the Persei, people, seen under street lamps, their faces blank slates that absorbed rather than reflected the dim light. The air carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone, as if the atmosphere itself had been charged by their presence. Their footsteps made no sound on the gravel, yet a low, rhythmic scratching seemed to emanate from their very forms. A primal dread took hold, the kind that tightens the chest and makes the world seem to narrow to a single, terrible point. These were not aliens from distant stars. They were the Taken, what remained when something hollowed out a person from within. The ones from the flight path who had stopped reporting symptoms because they had been replaced. Imagine the unsettling quiet that descends when a person you've known for years suddenly loses all their familiar quirks and anxieties. Their voice becomes a flat, measured tone, devoid of its usual warmth or irritation, leaving only a hollow, procedural sound. And the feeling, it's the creeping, oily dread that comes not from a monster in the dark, but from the person sitting next to you on the couch, who no longer feels like a person at all. The Phoenix Lights weren't a visitation. They were a scan. Picture that silent, luminous armada not as ships, but as a single, vast eye-opening in the night sky, its gaze a tangible pressure sweeping across rooftops and into bedrooms. You wouldn't hear it with your ears, but your mind might catch the faint, psychic hum of a frequency searching, probing, like the buzz of a dentist drill felt in your teeth. A net cast over a city of millions, searching for specific, compatible minds. The lonely, the seekers, the desperate. They were isolated souls, each staring into the glow of a screen, searching for connection in the digital void. A faint, digital hum was the only sound in their quiet spaces, a sterile backdrop to their silent desperation. A deep, hollow ache settled in their chests, a longing so profound it felt like a physical weight, and the net had caught its keep. It was a web of invisible threads, woven not from silk, but from their own deepest vulnerabilities and unanswered searches. The air in the room grew thick and stale, smelling faintly of overheated electronics and something else. Something metallic, like cold iron. A final, soft click echoed in the silence, not from a keyboard, but from deep within the machine itself. A latch snapping shut. The figures advanced with a slow, deliberate shuffle, their feet dragging through the wet leaves with a sickening, sticky sound. Mike and John stumbled backward, their own panicked breaths hitching in their throats, the cold, damp air of the forest clinging to their skin. Then, a shaft of pale moonlight cut through the canopy, illuminating one of the approaching forms for just a heartbeat. In that fractured moment, John's mind seized the tousled hair, the familiar shape of the jaw. It was Tom, the friendly dog walker from their neighborhood. But Tom's eyes were wrong. Empty pools of darkness that seemed to swallow the light, and a faint, coppery scent of iron hung in the air around him. A primal dread took hold of John, freezing him in place as the recognizable face twisted everything he knew into something terrifying and unknown. Sunlight dappled through the oak leaves, casting shifting patterns across the manicured grass where Sarah sat alone. The only sounds were the distant hum of a lawnmower and the faint rustle of a breeze through the hydrangeas. Yet the warmth of the afternoon sun couldn't penetrate the cold knot that had settled in her stomach. Mike and John ran from that canyon with a haste born of pure animal terror, their lungs burning with each gasping breath. The memory carried the scent of dry sagebrush and something else, a metallic tang, like old pennies left in the dust. They never spoke of it again, not to their wives over morning coffee, not to their children at bedtime, not even in the private darkness of their own thoughts. Some truths are so jagged they tear at the throat if you try to give them voice. The man, official story, had solidified, comfortable, and mundane, like a well-worn path Sarah walked every day without question. But then, she saw Mr. Henderson watering his lawn, and the first crack appeared in that comfortable reality. The rhythmic hiss of the spray was the only sound, a metronome against the evening stillness. But his movements were too precise, too mechanical. A faint, coppery scent, like old pennies or wet iron, drifted on the breeze, mingling unnaturally with the smell of damp earth and cut grass. Sarah's fingers went numb where they gripped the windowsill, the painted wood suddenly feeling clammy and cold against her skin. And as she watched, Mr. Henderson's head slowly turned, not to look at his lawn, but to stare directly, unblinkingly, at her window. The ordinary act of watering a lawn froze into something profoundly wrong. a silent performance staged just for her. In that moment, the mundane world peeled back, revealing the terrifying truth hiding in plain sight. He turns and waves, his smile warm and inviting, like a beacon of familiarity in the gathering dusk. But his wave is perfectly metronomic, a mechanical gesture that defies human spontaneity. 1 second passes. The arm rises with unnerving precision, cutting through air that suddenly smells of ozone and damp earth. 2 seconds. His smile remains fixed, a porcelain mask that doesn't reach his hollow eyes, while a faint scratching sound emerges from the shadows behind him. 3 seconds. The wave stops abruptly, leaving his hand suspended midair as a sticky, cold sensation creeps up the observer's neck. In that stillness, a primal dread takes hold, whispering that this smile was never meant for the living. John doesn't sleepwalk anymore. He sleeps deeply now, with a profound stillness that feels unnatural, too soundly. Sometimes, Sarah watches him in the dead of night, her own breath held, and his breathing is so perfectly regular, so devoid of the subtle hitches and sighs of a living body, that it sounds like a machine. The air in the room grows thick and still, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the cold, dry touch of a sterile environment. It's the silence between those measured breaths that weighs on her, a void where a human presence should be. And at night, she still hears the chime, but now, it doesn't come from outside. The familiar, metallic resonance vibrates from somewhere inside the very walls of her room. Each note hangs in the stale air, thick with the scent of old wood and a faint, coppery hint she can't place. A profound, icy stillness settles over her limbs, rooting her to the mattress as the sound seems to seep from the floorboards beneath her. It's a sound that feels less like hearing and more like a cold, damp pressure forming just behind her eyes. Her breath catches, a ragged, shallow thing that does nothing to fill her lungs, as the final chime dissolves not into silence, but into a low, pervasive hum. John sleeps peacefully beside her, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Then it comes, a faint, distorted chime, like a warped music box heard through water. The sound isn't in the room. It emanates from within John himself. A metallic scent of ozone fills the air, cold and electric against her skin. Her breath catches in her throat, muscles locking as primal dread takes hold. The familiar man beside her now feels alien, a vessel for something incomprehensible. The camera pulls back further, revealing the sprawling metropolis shrinking to a mere speck of light against the cosmic void. The city's comforting glow becomes an isolated cluster, a lonely beacon adrift in an ocean of impenetrable shadow. Or is it, and what it left behind, already watching you? The question hangs in the air, thick with implication. A metallic scent, like ozone after a storm, seems to seep from the screen, while the air in your own room grows unnaturally still and cold. The screen plunges into absolute black, a void so complete it feels less like an absence of light and more like a physical presence. Then, a single, final, distorted chime echoes from the darkness. It doesn't ring, it unfolds. A sound that feels sticky and wrong, lingering long after it should have faded. The silence that follows is not empty. It is a waiting silence, charged with a dreadful anticipation, as if the darkness itself is holding its breath.